Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the Corsair 4000D Airflow. This is a mid-tower case from Corsair, and this is a pros and cons video where I'll be talking to you about the highlights and lowlights of this gaming case, what it's like to install in, and potential pitfalls of it. I've done a separate unboxing and installation video where I go into a lot of depth about all the different facets, as well as showing you what I used in the setup process to end up with this result. And it is a very nice looking case when it's finished, and for the most part it's a nice case to build in. It's also affordable, around £80 or $80, and it has some nice highlights that include that tempered glass side panel and a really nifty steel design with some pretty decent airflow through the front, as well as a number of other highlights that include multiple dust shields and protective layers to stop that dust ingress getting into your case and making a mess of it. Now, this case is available in white or black. Here you can see the white one, which looks absolutely beautiful, and it's really nicely designed in a number of different ways, and there are a number of highlights to it that include, as you can see, a vertical mount at the rear for your GPU, so you want to show it off like that. And by the way, I'm going to do a separate video where I will be installing GPU separately. Also has several dust shields. As I said, there's one at the bottom as one for the power supply unit to prevent dust getting sucked up from the ground or your desk into your PSU, and also there's one on top which is held in place with magnets, and you can easily take that off. And then for the installation process, that's dead simple too, because then you have easy access to the top area where you can install fans. It's worth noting that you can install a 240mm or 280mm radiator on the top there, a 360mm radiator on the front, or up to 620mm fans. Now, I'm going to leave all the specifications and other information in the description so you can check those out, as well as links to the other videos that will be relevant to you when you're watching this. But hopefully you'll find this video useful in highlighting the highlights and pitfalls of this case. This case comes with the ability to install 2 hard disk drives, 2 SSD drives, and you can see the hard disk drive bay at the bottom here as a pretty simple plug and play affair. You just slide out those trays and you can install the drives there. And it also has a very nice setup in terms of cable management. You see a large channel at the rear for cable management that includes these Velcro straps that allow you to keep the cables in place when you're installing them and to hold them in place during the setup process and afterwards. Inside the box you also get your standard plastic cable ties, so it's easy to tie the cables up and make things nice and neat. And one of the highlights is almost certainly the different hooks and loops for cable channeling and making sure everything's tidy and getting the best looking result around the rear. You'll also note on the front as we go through, and you can see it here from the rear, there's a panel for hiding your cable mess as well on the front, so you can sort of slip things through. You can slip them over the top as well, as numerous different holes for looping your cables through and getting easy access to them. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this case is the setup of it. Obviously it's airflow, so it's designed with an open venting system on the front. Take that front panel off and you'll then see there's a dust shield underneath, and you can also remove that dust shield with ease as well. That's just clipping in place. One thing you'll note here immediately is this case comes with 2 fans installed. Corsair's Air Glide fans with anti-vortex fins designed to keep things nice and cool. Why they've shipped it with 2 fans is a mystery to me, though. You'll note one is installed on the front and one at the rear. It makes very little sense to me. It's an airflow case and yet they've only included 2 fans in it. It seems a bit odd. So basically it's a bring your own fan affair, which would be fine if they'd included 3 fans, because you could see yourself putting 2 on top and 1 at the rear, or maybe use the one that's installed on the front and 1 on the rear on the top as a solution. But you obviously can't use 2 fans on the front because you need 3 fans for that. So it's a bit of a strange setup, and that's a bit of a complaint from me. I think it's a bit odd they've included that. These are special fans that are designed for high airflow, and yet you don't get enough. You also can't purchase them separately at this point, so it's a bit of an odd one. Maybe in the future, if you can purchase it and you're not bothered about RGB lighting, because they're not RGB anyway, you could just try and get a complete set of these for brilliant airflow and maximum airflow for the case. Obviously they're designed to go with the case, so it makes sense to have a multitude of them. Now, highlight, as I said, is that cable management. You can see here, obviously nothing's installed at the moment, but very nice channeling for the cables. Another highlight is that the SSD trays can be removed easily enough. They're just held in with thumb screws, and you can take those off if you don't want to use them. And that's nifty because it gives you extra space, but it also means that you can do something else which is pretty cool. You have the ability to move those SSD trays as well, so as well as being on the rear, you can take them off and you can store them on the front just above the PSU shroud, so you're below your motherboard, so it'd be easy to plug them into the motherboard. And if you have some fancy SSDs that you want to show off, you want to be able to see through that glass panel, you can do that with ease too. And again, they just screw in with the thumb screws. If you have extra SSD trays somehow, you can install 4 as well potentially. The hard disk drive tray, in the meanwhile, is located underneath, just in front of the power supply unit. This is definitely a con for me. It's in a really awkward position. That means if you have even a medium to large PSU, you have very little room for your cables. You can see it is possible to move it. You can relocate that hard disk drive tray a bit further forward, but in my instance where I've used a radiator on the front panel, there's not much room there, so it would be a problem. I am not using the hard disk drive in this setup of this machine, so perhaps not a problem, but I want to highlight for those that are thinking about buying it the potential pitfalls of the lack of space in front of your power supply unit. If you're going to put hard drives in there, you're going to have a bit of a faff in terms of getting the power cables in. I would recommend installing the power cables before you put the power supply unit in, unless you've got tiny hands or a small child you can use to help you install the cables. Now, the tray is removable, but this is another niggle because those thumb screws are in so tight that it's very difficult to get them out. You cannot get a screwdriver in at the right angle to be able to do it. I tried to do it with a knife. You could use a coin or something small that you can get at the right angle, but the angle of the screw head was at such a position that I couldn't actually get anything in there easily. Eventually, with a bit of convincing and a lot of swearing, I managed to get it out, and it is then possible to then simply remove that tray and take it away, making a lot more space for your power supply unit and perhaps a bit better airflow as well. Obviously you can see my radiator at the front there, but if you had just fans, you'd then have the fans blowing air into the bottom and into your power supply unit, or at least onto it. Weird setup really, because I suppose one of those fans is then being wasted because it's blowing air around, not necessarily on the most important components. But as I said, I'm setting this case up with a 360mm radiator. You can use 240 or 280 on the top. I'm going to use a 360 on the front. Now, what I wanted to do is do a push-pull setup with this case, but unfortunately it's not quite enough room. I measured it out beforehand to check, and you'll see that the power supply unit shroud basically goes too far forwards. This is a problem for several reasons. One is you can't put the pump pipes at the bottom of the case. There's a video by Gamers Nexus which recommends doing this after they tested the various positions for your pump pipes on an all-in-one cooler, and saying that you shouldn't put it above the pump. And this is potentially a problem, because it means if you are using a 360mm radiator like me, you have to put it the wrong way around with the pipes at the top. Something to bear in mind. There's also not enough room to do a push-pull setup there, but I went through the setup process anyway. I installed it with my fans on the outside so you can get the maximum amount of RGB lighting and get some goodness going on there. The radiator behind that is going to suck cold air over the radiator and into the case, cooling the CPU and the other components as well. The end result looks pretty nice. It's a bit of faffing and a fiddle, but it's not too bad. There is something to bear in mind with this. It's not a complaint about the case though, it's more about my own personal error, but it's worth bearing in mind too, is that if you install the radiator a bit too low, you'll find that the dust shield that you can see that I'm installing here won't clip in properly at the bottom. the clips are blocked on one side, which means the dust shield then doesn't stick back. It's held in place with magnets generally. There's little magnets along the edge that make to clip the dust shield to the case and hold it in place to stop dust ingress. But because of the way I've installed the rad, it sits a bit too far in these bottom holes, which then prevents it from sitting back in there properly and sitting flush with the case, which is a bit of a shame. That is really a user error rather than a problem with the case though. Highlights, as I said, is the ability to be able to remove these SSD trays. Here I'm using a IQ Commander Core, which is a RGB fan hub which does the power and RGB lighting for Corsair's RGB ML fans that I'm using in this installation, and being able to remove those SSD trays means you can then install that core there and maximize your ability to install the different cables. But there's plenty of room at the back, loads of space to be able to install the cables. In fact, here you can see that channeling that I was talking about alongside the motherboard. There's a nice little bit of cable channeling which you can hide your cables behind, and that's almost certainly a highlight of this case, is the number of areas that you can run cables to keep things nice and neat. You've got that shroud that covers the cables at the front. There's obviously the PSU shroud that hides all your PSU nonsense at the back. You've got the cable channeling that runs down the back there too. There's loads of different hooks for cable tidying in general. And you can see me going through the process of tidying things up at the back here. Obviously I don't have hard disk drives or SSD drives, so I actually don't have that many cables, which is great, so it makes the process a lot easier. I'm also planning on making some changes to this case in the near future, so I didn't want to go too overboard, but using those Velcro straps and a few cable ties, I'm able to make a pretty nice looking rear, which is obviously going to help with airflow and ends in a good result. But that highlight is almost certainly the ability to just tuck things out of the way. So not only can they be hooked down with the cable ties and those metal hooks on the edges, but you can also just tuck the cables along the edges and hide them behind the design of the case as well, so the end result looks really nice too. This is a good solid steel case with a really nice design to it, and once again Corsair's cable management design means it is a joy to build in that way. The end result is a case that looks really nice and has good airflow to it. I did some testing on it, which I'll show you in a minute, basically running it through various different benchmarking softwares and also just putting it through its paces, and came out with some good results. But the visual aesthetics of it is also nice. You can see it has that nice tempered glass panel, and you have easy access to the RGB lighting at the front. You can see that through the metal, which you'll see in a second, but with the dust shields off you can also see that. So the highlights for me are almost certainly those dust shields, the cable management, and the overall look and feel of the case. It's actually reasonably easy to build in too if you take away the niggles with the hard disk drive bay and that front radiator space, but otherwise it's a great looking machine. Now, talking about the airflow, you'll be interested to see potentially what went on here. Obviously this is going to vary depending on your setup, but for me it did really well. I ran with folding at home all day long with CPU maxed out at 100%, and it got around 70 degrees, so it wasn't too hot. It ran pretty well for that and resulted in a good airflow and a good result. Hope you found this video useful. If you're interested, check out the full unboxing and installation video where I go into a lot more depth on the case and all the different facets of it. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Hope you found it useful, interesting, hilarious, or all of the above. Be sure to check out the description for other information you might find interesting, and subscribe and watch these other videos as well that I think might be useful to you, and have a great life.